tumbling through 1,000 centuries. You don't know where you land. It's so dark in mythology. Treasures of history to be found. Hear the legends of time. All the handiworks remain. Only the dream away. Orion, Orion,
Doctor Who Season 9 ran from the 1st of January to the 24th of June 1972. It's kind of a midway point between the earlier Pertwee era, with the Doctor completely earthbound and the extended cast of unit personnel, and the later Pertwee era when he had his TARDIS back, so he wasn't limited to Earth, and the regular unit cast were relegated to being recurring characters. Having learnt their lesson from the last season, we actually get stories where the Master is not the villain. I love the guy, but Season 8 was ridiculous. The first story is the 4-part Day of the Daleks. Guess who turns up? 10 points if you said Hagans. The Hagans are one of the 2 races that the new show put into a blender with some police badges and so created the Jadun. The other race was the Sontarans. And Rhinoceros. Don't tell me you can't see it. The Hagans are intergalactic mercenaries. Big, dumb, violent, and they'll kill anyone they're paid to kill. They are a bit like space gorillas with guns. And the regrettable shade of makeup chosen probably makes them seem more possibly racist than I'm sure was intended. But I'm not that surprised they'd never come back. Anyway, they've been hired by the Daleks. Their first appearance since Season 4's Evil of the Daleks. 5 years. Now that's a gap to generate mystique in your iconic bad guy. Because of the young age of much of the audience, and because there were no repeats, or VHS, or DVDs, or internet, there were a large amount of kids who either didn't see or didn't remember Season 4, and all they had were stories about the Daleks. And the last 2 stories they appeared in were 2 of the best Dalek stories ever done. So this was massive. It's just a pity that this isn't that great. It's much more memorable for its unorthodox use of time travel than for the Daleks, I'm afraid. Although it is also fairly memorable for having the Doctor gun down Hagans.
Doctor, what on earth's going on?
Well, Brigadier, I appear to be gunning down sentient aliens in a way that my later incarnations would swear that I never would.
Well, Doctor, that sounds bally silly of them.
I know, I can be such a prick sometimes. Anyway, on to the Curse of Peladon, another 4-parter. Peladon's an alien planet where the king's agonizing over whether they should join the Galactic Federation. How surprised would you be if I mentioned that this was made about the time the UK was deciding whether it wanted to join the European Union? Oh, that surprised? I'm shocked. King Peladon falls in love with Jo, and he's played by David Troughton, Patrick Troughton's son. He appeared briefly in the War Games, played Professor Hobbs in Midnight, one of New Who's best episodes, and recently appeared in the 5-ish Doctor's reboot playing a Dalek operator. This is a usual tale of a modernizing monarch running afoul of a curse, court intrigue, ambassadors, old-school religious leaders, and a monster god called Agador. The most interesting thing about this story is not the plot, but the characters. We get a rare, non-villainous ice warrior, and an ambassador from Alpha Centauri that I'm not sure I shouldn't censor. If Blip decides to pull this video, you will know why. The more I think about this story, the more I realize it's a little bit like Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Religion, tradition, joining a federation, random aliens, usually evil alien races given a more 3-dimensional treatment. Of course, now I'm wondering how the story would have gone if the Cisco was involved. It probably would have been much shorter, and way too cool to put on early 70s British TV. More's the pity. Next we have the sequel to Doctor Who and the Silurians, cleverly not called Doctor Who and the Sea Devils. This is also the story where the Master returns. Ever since his crimes against fashion and the demons, he's been held in a private unit prison. Because what the fuck is a fair trial? Doctor Who is so ahead of its time sometimes. The Master is being held in an old sea fort and claims to be reformed. He spends much of his time either thinking kids' TV is real,
What are you watching?
It seems to be a rather interesting extraterrestrial life form.
Only puppets, you know. For children.
Oh.
or trolling people into believing that he thinks kids' TV is real. The bit where the Master watches Teletubbies in The Sound of Drums is a direct reference to this, by the way. I'm guessing Russell the Davies thought he was being serious, because he's really got no reason to troll anyone in that scene in Sound of Drums. I'm fairly sure the only other person in the room at the time was a Toclafane. Anyway, his guards are being trained to resist his hypnosis, the area outside is littered with mines, and he's constantly being watched. So will he get out? Of fucking course he will. The Sea Devils are the aquatic relatives of the Silurians, meaning that if the Silurians from Classic Who and New Who are not the same type, then there's at least 3 different and distinct types of Silurians. And they don't call themselves the Sea Devils. A guy who sees one calls them Sea Devils, which explains why in the Peter Davison era they're calling themselves the Sea Devils. But I'll get to that later. This is 6 episodes long and has a bunch of padding, but I like most of it, especially the iconic shots of the Sea Devils rising from the sea to attack the land. I really think they should return in a story with H.P. Lovecraft. Maybe they could be the accidental inspiration for the Cthulhu mythos. Fun fact, the only reason they're wearing netting is because the director insisted on the reptiles not being naked because it'd be indecent. So the costume guys threw that on them. The Mutants, another 6-parter, is next. Interestingly, the story The Daleks from Season 1 was often referred to as the Mutants until this story happened. And, sorry, gotta do this.
Monty Python, the Flying Circus!
The Doctor and Joe have been sent on a mission to the planet Solos by the Time Lords. Humanity colonized the planet ages ago and they're now planning on pulling out. Unfortunately, the guys currently in charge of the colony don't want to pull out, hate the locals, are planning on terraforming the planet because fuck indigenous life forms, and have been killing the locals. The Solonians, who are spontaneously mutating. Seriously, this planet is like X-Men. This was intended to be a parable against racism, but it was fairly bungled in execution. Bungled enough that Salman Rushdie insulted it for being racist in the Satanic Verses. Weird to think that Rushdie took time off from doing shit that really annoyed a lot of people to complain about racism in a Doctor Who story. But what can you do? I suppose you could ask him where he was when the show was being deliberately racist. I mean, by the time the Mutants came out, it hadn't quite finished with that. We still have a couple of stories to go. So on to our last story of the season, the Time Monster. Remember the underwater menace? Well, it's time to go back to Atlantis. A completely different Atlantis because there's apparently no such thing as continuity in Doctor Who. The Master is back and so is the Brigadier and the rest of UNIT. There are experiments going on with time, the transmission of matter through interstitial time, or Tom Tit experiment for short.
What's it all about, anyway?
Tom Tit, that's what it's all about. Demonstration of Tom Tit.
Tom Tit? What on earth does that stand for?
Well, it's the
Transmission of matter through interstitial time.
Yes, exactly what I was going to say. Tom Tit.
I'm amazed any of them can say that without giggling. I only manage because I'm a semi-professional.
What's it all about, anyway?
Tom Tit, that's what it's all about. Demonstration of Tom Tit. Right, we better be on our way to the Newton Institute.
The Master plans to use a monster from the time vortex, Kronos, to destroy shit. Unfortunately, Kronos is worshipped as a god in ancient Atlantis, so everyone heads there. Where, alas, there are no surgically altered fish people this time. But there is a Minotaur, random people getting aged and de-aged, leaving at least one semi-regular wearing a nappy, which is UK for diaper, and TARDISes land inside each other. Like the Underwater Menace, this is fucking insane. Is it too much to ask for a story about a mythical sinking city that makes some sort of sense? I mean, in the Demons, Azal claimed he destroyed it. We can't have the giant goat leg thing be the sanest reason for the destruction of Atlantis. It's just not fair. What else about this story? The TARDIS interior is fucking terrible, and the Master gets away. Season 9 was more bad than good. Pertwee's Earthbound stuff really holds up on average better than his space stuff, and his stuff that's heavy in imagination holds up even less well. I applaud them for trying to do some new stuff in Day of the Daleks and the Time Monster, but they weren't rousing successes. Join me next time for the last appearance of the Master in a long time, the return of the first 2 Doctors, and Joe Grant's departure amid a sea of comedy Welsh people.
Measure the mystery and the sound without taking up time. Show the handiwork swimming on your dream away.
I wouldn't do that if I were you. That's government property.